uplifting, refreshing, life-changing. It's Amazing Grace TV.
Welcome AGTV viewers. My name is Irva Lively. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have Minister Ferneil White, who's going to discuss a little bit about the Angel Tree Ministries. Please stay tuned. Ferneil, welcome to AGTV. It's so good to have you here, and we thank you so much for coming and sharing about Angel Tree Ministry, and because we know that it's a passion not only of yours but of your husband, Minister Roy, as well. But our AGTV viewers always want to know how you came to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll be glad to. First of all, thank you for having me here.
You're welcome.
Well, when I was growing up, I grew up in a very abusive home. And as a matter of fact, to talk about Christ was something that you got punished for. So one of the blessings that I had was I was able to go down to the country to be with my grandmother. And that's where I got exposed to Christ and to the church. And there was a Sunday when the preacher was offering for those to want to receive Christ to come forward, and I did. I had a life-changing experience, and I did. Now, I didn't begin serving the Lord until much later in life, because at that point I was not taught that, you know, you're supposed to actually experience the Word and get into the Word. I was just exposed to religion. But once I met my husband, right before I met my husband actually, is when I received Christ.
Oh, wow.
And actually I was at a place in my life where I was considering taking my life because I couldn't see where it was going.
Wow.
And at that point, well, I'll never forget, I was in my terry cloth blue robe sitting on my bed.
You remember it so clearly.
I remember it so clearly. And I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, if you're real and you're really out there, I want you to do something with my life. I give you my life. And I said, while you're at it, give me a husband that really loves me and that wants to be with me. It's about you and about the family. And he did both those things.
Wow. So you really made your request known unto the
yes.
Lord.
Little did I know that he was going to do it all in one fell swoop. Wow. But I received Christ, and about 3 or 4 months later, I met my husband.
Wow. How did you come to know about your spiritual gifts? And then when you knew about them, or how did you apply them?
First, being in the church that we're in Faith Christian Church International Outreach Center, you're taught about the spiritual gifts.
Okay.
And we had been in the Lord for several years and had learned about the gifts, but it just got to a point where it was like I was saying, Lord, there has to be more to serving you than this. More than just coming to church, more than just, you know, being excited with praise and worship and all those wonderful things that we're involved in. But then as I began to seek the Lord, he began to say, okay, I want you to serve. And so I began to serve, actually came to the church by faith and began to serve by cleaning the bathrooms and the toilets after the women that would come in, the homeless women that came in from D.C. And in that place, I'll never forget, I was over a toilet cleaning it when the Holy Spirit began to speak to me. And he said to you, the same way you're washing these toilets, I'm going to use you to minister to my women. And that's where it began to flow. And so in that place of service is when he began to show me that the spiritual gifts that he endows us with, that's when they're best used, when you humble yourself and you begin to serve. Even as Jesus girded himself with a towel, gotcha, and he humbled himself and he washed the disciples' feet, is the same way where the gifts began to flow. And that was the beginning. And so at that point, he began to speak to Roy and our heart both about serving in prisons. And I was at home. I'll never forget, I was at home just washing my dishes, minding my business, and I felt the wooing of the Holy Spirit to just stop and spend time with him. And as soon as I stopped and spent time with him, he began to speak to me. He said, there are men and women in prisons locked all over that are waiting to hear your words of life. Now, little did I know that at the same time, my husband was on his job, and he was also spending some time with the Lord. And the Lord began to speak to him about how he was going to use us to go in and tear down those things that have been erected over generations and to rebuild after his pattern. And thus began the prison ministry.
Wow, that's powerful. Say that again. Tear down.
Tear down.
And rebuild.
And rebuild. And
lives.
He said that, yes, lives. And he's explained to us that a lot of the things that people that have habits, that have cause them to be incarcerated have come from strongholds and generational things that are going on that really are not their fault. So if you really look at a prisoner's life, a lot of times they're victims themselves. And what they are, they're victims and products of abused households, or like, for instance, in one situation, I was serving in a youth facility. And I'll never forget, this young man came in and he had his pants hanging down low and he thought he was the toughest thing going. But what happened was, as we began to sit down and share, I was sharing with him about how things should be, the order of God in the household, moms and dads. And he said, well, how can you tell me that when my mom and dad were crackheads and they sold crack from the house? And my grandmother, my grandpa, that's what they did. This is what he was exposed to. Oh, wow. So it was just to even teach the basic principles in the Word, you have to know how to approach it a different way, because a lot of times they've been exposed to something totally different.
Okay, so you had, I'm going to just take you back.
Okay.
You had no idea, was there a passion in your heart for the incarcerated? Was there something that had you been crying out for the Lord?
I had been crying out to the Lord, saying, Lord, there's got to be more than this.
Okay.
And I really believe that that's what God does. He brings us to a place in the Lord, in Him, to where we're ready to go the next step. And so as I cried out to Him, that's when He began to reveal to us where He was calling us. So now, prior to that, I was very content.
Okay.
And just being in the church and singing in the choir and things like that. And if He had probably brought prison ministry at that point, I probably would have rejected it. But because I was hungry for the Lord and had a passion for what He wanted, for a purpose in my life, then when He brought that out, we were ready to embrace it, even though it was something we'd never done before.
And I'm not trying to be over spiritual with it, but I hear you say that the first place that He had you for service is cleaning toilets.
Yes.
And as we know, cleaning toilets in a home or in a church, it's not easy. It's not a clean job.
It's not a clean
job. It's basically changing the dirty diapers of the incarcerated. Because again, that's not a glamorous, really platform ministry job either. But it's a necessary position.
Yes, it is. Very necessary.
So if we had to ask you this, what motivates you to do what you and Minister Roy do for the incarcerated? What drives you?
What drives
to want to do this? Other than the fact that we know that service is a kingdom principle.
Yes.
But what motivates you to do? Because it's a choice. You still don't have to do it.
Well, there's several things that motivate me.
Okay.
One of them is actually coming from my past. Having grown up in an abusive home and seeing where it can lead to. I was raised in Brooklyn, New York City, and most of my friends there actually wound up either dead or in prison or strung out on drugs because of the atmosphere that they were in. And growing up in Brooklyn, New York City, is just not an easy place, especially in the inner city.
Gotcha.
And with the background that I have of having low self-esteem, all those things, I understood a lot of times where people are coming from. Because you can be a victim, and what you need when you're a victim is you need to be ministered to.
Okay.
You need someone to look past the outer shell, past the things that I'm doing or the things that you see me acting out, and get to the heart of the matter. And that's what I've seen God do. As we stepped out on faith and began to go into the prisons, going into the ladies' facilities, and I met some very hardened women in there. Wow. And as we sat and we spent 10 weeks in reentry class with them in the different various avenues that we get in, and we minister to them, the layers begin to peel off, and what gets exposed is a hurt child. In most cases, when you bottom line it, most prisoners they're victims themselves. They've been hurt, and what they've done is they've covered up and they've layered with all these outer things to try to make themselves appear larger than they are.
Gotcha.
But when they can trust you, when they see through relationship, when they see through like things like Angel Tree program, you're reaching out to them, no matter what state of life that they're in, then they begin to receive something that's beyond just human effort. They begin to receive the love of Christ. And because they feel genuine love, because there's genuine concern there, then they begin to open up, and you'll see them begin to receive where they weren't receiving before. The mission of Angel Tree really is to be an outreach to bring Christ into the home, first to the whole individual, to the incarcerated individual, to the family members that are being the caretakers. They're going through some things themselves. They need to be ministered to, and to the children. Children of prisoners wind up going to prison themselves.
Really?
A lot of them wind up they're either following the pattern of their parents, or they become so embittered themselves and angry at the whole situation that they themselves turn to a life of crime. So what Angel Angel Tree does is it targets by sharing the love of Christ. We don't just give a tangible gift.
Okay.
We share the evangelistic message of Christ themselves.